My guest today spent 24 years with the LAPD, including time working the division that investigates its own officers for misconduct, corruption, and cover-ups. And he's here to tell us exactly what they were hiding. His name is Marlon Marrache, and this is what the LAPD doesn't want you to know. Where'd you grow up, Marlon?
Born and raised in Peru. I'm a Latino kid from Lima, Peru, and I came here in I decided, right, my parents, my mom, my brother, my sister, and I decided to land permanently in December of 1980, so I'm giving away my age, and I've been here ever since, and so happy as can be. What I will say is when I meet people who actually come to the States, I'm like, no one wants to leave. It doesn't really matter what age you are. You just come here and you want to stay here and, make a better life for yourself. So.
And where did your family decide to settle down when they came?
Los Angeles. So it was in the 818, San Fernando Valley. So a lot back my mom came here, like, I want to say in the 60s, right? And 60s and the 70s. And so back then there wasn't really a large population of Peruvians, if you will, right? And a lot of them actually here in Jersey. Like there's this, section in Jersey where it's saturated with Peruvians, but that was back then, and Los Angeles. But then again, back then you really don't think about big major cities besides what? Maybe Los Angeles, New York, and then Miami, and that's it. Where now, everybody thinks of, Dallas, Chicago, and other major cities. So it was quite a challenge, I would imagine, for her being here, starting a whole life. And we followed suit and we ended up here.
What did your parents do for work when they were here?
My mom got heavily involved in immigration. So she is that one lawyer without a license, that does anything and everything. I mean, you want to talk about typing 120 words a minute and at the same time talking on the phone and dealing with someone in front of you. Multitasking with my mom is number one. So back then, I'm taking you to, I want to say the 70s, where amnesty was huge. So anything and everything there is to know about immigration, my mom knows the process from beginning to end. So, and she got remarried to my stepfather, and my father ended up in Peru, where he did 32 years in the Peruvian Navy. So I'm a Navy guy.
Is that where you think you got the law enforcement interest from, or?
No, interestingly enough, I knew we were going to go trip down memory lane, and I started thinking to myself, law enforcement to me came way later, man. I'm a late bloomer. I'm one of those that really had no direction, had no drive. The only thing I really cared about was working out, playing basketball, just playing sports. I'm a sports dude. I always tell people that if I would have ended up staying in Peru, I either would have been a professional soccer player or ended up being a naval officer like my dad. And so law enforcement came way later. My best friend, shout out, where's the camera? Shout out to Rick Krinsky. Rick was very influential. And you would know this, that your friends really play and have a major impact, especially during your teens as you continue to grow and experience stuff. So Rick and my other best friend, Quincy, were very influential in my life. And it was Rick who actually started looking into becoming a cop for LAPD, did a ride along, and he was already 2 years into his law enforcement career when I was in the Navy and I didn't want to reenlist. And so those conversations that we were having and just kind of watching him go through the academy, go through his probationary period at the Los Angeles Police Department, I applied, and here we are, right? And so I owe a lot of my success definitely to Rick, but more than anything, the success that had been afforded belongs to the LAPD. So
do you think younger you would have ever envisioned yourself being a cop? Not that it was a thought like you were saying, but just if you had that vision.
Well, as we're having this conversation to self-reflect, no, right? Uh, no, no, I don't think that, it's a very interesting question because I was one of those kids with an absent father, right? And a lot of us, I've realized there's a lot of my friends, even my close circle of friends, we also have had absent fathers. An absent father plays a major role in an impact in how you develop, to become something. I mean, you can take athletes, professional athletes, if you will, as an example, right? Their kids are always with them, either dribbling the basketball or going to batting cages. And next, they're the next generation to become something. So for me, I didn't necessarily think that law enforcement was for me. I just knew that I had to do something at 24, 25 years old. I didn't want to reenlist in the United States Navy. I didn't want to be a lifer. I just wanted to go home. And it was that decision in my mid-20s where I said, you know what? Yeah, I definitely want to be a cop. So
How old were you exactly when you took that test and started?
well, I took the test in, I was what, 27? It was my last year. So I must have been like 27, 28.
Oh, so that was on the later side.
Oh, yeah. No,
Mm.
I'm a late bloomer. I dropped out of high school. I ended up in the Navy at 25 years old, 24, 25. I enlisted, and I'm in boot camp with a whole bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds. I started the police academy at 29, turning 30 years old. And then lo and behold, I just finished law school about 10 years ago. So I ended up going to school.
Oh, wow.
I was one of those 20-year veterans, I should say, continuing education that took that long. But I did it, and everything in my life has been pretty late. But you know what? There's that saying, right? Better late than never. So
Do you ever think about if you continued down the Navy route, how that would have turned out?
yes, I would have probably ended up being a commissioned officer. I was enlisted. So I had to have gone to school, get my degree, and I don't know, maybe ended up being a JAG, a lawyer for the Navy or something along those lines. And I kind of did it for my father. My father was a commanding officer of all the submarines in the Peruvian Navy. So it was kind of those things where I'm not going to choose the Army. I'm not going to go to the Marines. I'm just going to go out to sea and experience that lifestyle, right? Living in a ship, it's wild, bro. It really is. It's very challenging. So yeah, I could have seen myself being a lifer, done 20, 30 years and, had a really good career.
It's interesting. It's still kind of similar paths because you were just saying a JAG or an attorney for the Navy, but you went into IA down the line. I feel like those are similar in a way.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because I have talked about this before where back in the Navy, my first year, I was just an apprentice. So I worked on the flight, not the hangar bay, which is right below the flight deck. So I was in an aircraft carrier for 3 years. Shout out to CV-64, my Connie guys, USS Constellation CV-64, where I was just chalking and chaining planes. And when I say chalking and chaining, planes would get taxied in, they stationed it, and then we had to grab these chains and chalk them up, right? So they don't move, and then chain them on these, it's kind of like a pad eye where you had to hook them. And so that was my job, 16, 18 hours a day. And so after like maybe a couple of months, they decided to say, who wants to go work up in the tower with the air boss and mini boss and do air operations? And I'm like, man, I raised both of my hands. I'm like, I want to go because this is a lot of labor, dude. And so I ended up working at the tower, and they used to call us tower flowers because it was kind of like an admin. You're just basically watching air operations all day. Planes take off, land, gear hook. I mean, you're learning kind of like an air traffic controller type of job, right? And so from there, in my second year in the Navy, I had to do what they call striking. So basically, you got to make a decision. What job do you want to do in the Navy? And so one of those jobs was to get involved in legal. I don't know why, bro, but I just like to know people's dirty laundry. I got involved all in discipline and legal, and I ended up working in legal for my last 2 years. And in there, anything and everything that happened in this 5,000-man aircraft carrier, if you got in trouble, I knew about it because I had to prepare all these cases for the lawyers and, for the JAGs that were in the aircraft carrier. As a matter of fact, I want to say we were the only ship that actually had 7 special court-martial hearings, basically trials, on board. So they actually flew in a trial team, a defense team, and a judge. And we had about 6 or 7 I want to say the room was probably even smaller than this. And my job was to prepare all those cases. And so with that being said, that's 1995 to 1997. Fast forward to 2008 is when I got involved in the world of internal affairs and discipline with the Los Angeles Police Department. So
now, what was the reputation of the LAPD when you first joined? What was that time frame?
You talking about just in general, or
And
just about
what you knew of it going in?
Oh, well, let's see. Rodney King trial just happened in 1992. So I was like, I don't want no part of that, right? And then you have the Reginald Denny incident that happened on Florence and Normandy from the riots, right? So let me back up. Rodney King happened in 1990-ish. I want to say 1990. My friends are going to correct me. They're going to say, what the hell you tell? You should know your timelines. But 1992 was the trial, and that's when the riots happened. So for me, I was like, I don't want to do this job. This is crazy, because pretty much the city of Los Angeles burnt down. And so when I got in July of 1998, it had its challenges like any other law enforcement agency. And I definitely want to go on the record to let you know and your audience know that when we start talking about discipline and when we start talking about internal affairs matters, we start talking about corruption, shady cops that are criminals in uniform, that exist to this very day. We can't say that we're all these great cops. There's some bad apples and some bad actors. But you also got to keep in mind is that population, when we start talking about cops that are, cutting corners and doing dirty, there is what I want to say, I think I just checked the stats. There's north of 800,000 sworn police officers throughout the entire United States. And I want to say there's about 18,000 agencies throughout the United States. So when people ask me, talk about internal affairs, yes, there is corrupt cops. There always will be. The question is, how do we identify and see that, that cop is cutting corners. So that guy's a gangster in uniform. And so that's the challenge. And so in LAPD back then, only to say that we just went through the Rampart scandal where we had, I don't know if you're familiar with what happened with Officer Ray Perez, one particular officer that was working Los Angeles Police Department's Rampart division in the gang unit called Crash, right? Basically in August of 1998, he decides to go and steal cocaine from LAPD's main property division and distribute it and act like a gangster in uniform. So imagine you being in the academy, right? And here you are. We started in July. This happened in August. A month later, our instructors come in and say, hate to give you the bad news, but there's been something really bad that has happened. This officer went in and stole cocaine and, decided to, he's been arrested, right? And all of us are looking at each other like, yeah, wow, right? I mean, that's like an oh shit kind of feeling. But I'm here to tell you, man, when you're in the academy, and I'm sure, a lot of your audience that are cops that have been in the academy, bro, all you want to do is graduate. Like your whole mindset is, I just want to kind of like pass all my tests, love the camaraderie, but I want to graduate and begin my career as a cop. So we didn't really, at least for me, right, in my lens, I didn't really think much of it. But out of that, there was a lot of reform. There was a consent decree that happened in 2001. So between 1997, 1998, up until 2001, the department, LAPD, spent the majority of their time reforms with a federal consent decree that kicked in and started in 2001 to have better practices, to make sure we're doing things the right way, better procedures. Because I'm here to tell you, the early 90s to the mid 90s, police work was completely different. And there probably wasn't that many checks and balances, you know? But we've gotten so much better ever since then. I mean, I'm taking you back, 30, 35 years ago. I can tell you from what I do every day, I'm still consulting. I work as a witness expert in certain internal affairs cases. And you know this, I got my YouTube channel. We have all these conversations about internal affairs. I can tell you that stuff like this is still happening. Why? Because again, there's just a lot. And you know, we're getting there. We're trying to get better.
You think it's worse now than back then, or was it worse before and better now?
I want to say it's worse now because of social media and the fact that if an event happens in a real small town, well, let's take this as an example. We're in
Richfield.
We're in Richfield, Connecticut, right? If the local cop here, God forbid, he's a male white, right? The officer, and the suspect is male black, and it's either a shooting or a major use of force where people consider to be excessive. Even this town, you'll hear about it across the nation because of social media, because of the media having that responsibility, which I don't agree at times, to make it so sensational that it's like, oh shit, if they're doing it here in Dansbury, guess what? They're doing it all the way out in Los Angeles. Of course, it's LAPD. They're a huge organization. And then here comes, you know, that narrative. And we don't really think about, okay, why don't we wait for the investigation? One, two, why don't we try to see where the officer did wrong or not, or what was his or her training that caused this officer to make a split-second decision, right? And I'm giving you an example of an OIS, officer-involved shooting, and just wait to see what the circumstances are, but we don't. And so it is much worse from that lens now than it was before. Where before, if it's a major incident, again, here in Dansbury in 1995, 1996, it's not going to reach Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, Arizona, Los Angeles, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think it causes, say, like mayors to react maybe prematurely. Like there was an incident in Connecticut. The mayor just fired a cop, but it just hit the news. Internal Affairs probably didn't even wrap up the investigation yet.
Correct.
And this cop's already out of a job. Now you have cops in the department that are mad at the city because they fired him prematurely.
Right.
And then you have cases that probably don't even need to make the news that are an IA problem, but not a necessarily criminal problem, like the cop that slept with the other individuals, the other officers.
Yeah.
Is that necessarily criminal wrongdoing? No, but it ruined like the reputation of a lot of cops.
Yeah, and hey, if he's doing it, guess what? Everybody else is doing it, right? Very, very good scenario and very good point you bring up, because a lot of times, and this is what I do, one of many reasons to have a police podcast and a show is that we keep preaching transparency. I don't think we're that good at transparency. We're very transparent with the public. I think it's great. I think an incident like that, the mayor, goes and does a press conference, tells the community, hey, look what this cop did. That's just, very inappropriate, very unprofessional. That's great. But how transparent are we amongst ourselves? We're not. In fact, you want to get rid of them, and you just want to, kind of like, sweep up the trash and just put it away, hope that when, trash day comes, you can just grab the bag and just throw it. But that's not part of transparency whatsoever. What we should be doing is, okay, well, why don't we wait until this whole administrative process? Well, first, let's look at criminal. Is there anything here criminal in nature? And if it is, then let's go to the local county attorney, district attorney, present it. Chances are it'll probably get rejected. Okay, now comes the admin. So what do we do to ensure that this doesn't happen again? And to your point, yeah, it's wrongdoing. It's very unbecoming conduct. We have that one, very big umbrella about conduct unbecoming an officer. What that basically means is that we're kind of in the business of things not looking good. I say this all the time. Like if you and I were, I was a chief and you were my partner, or let's just say it's Chief Bick, and I'm your partner, and we see an incident that you just described. Well, it doesn't look good. It's all on camera. So then because it doesn't look good, it reflects so negative on this entire department and the community, we kind of got to get rid of him. And then what we do is just get rid of them and leave them. By the way, while they're going through this whole process, we leave them in the island all by themselves. And I say this all the time, and shout out to James Zurich. I promised him that I will copyright and trademark his quote, which is so true. It's the punishment. The punishment's not the penalty, Ian. The punishment is truly the process. And I think that's where we miss a lot with not just law enforcement. I'm sure, when we start talking about correctional facilities and in that culture itself, no one talks about what that actual correctional officer went through. No one talks about how, hey, man, well, you've done an outstanding job with all your guests to talk about that particular lens of what you experienced when you were incarcerated. So, but for cops, we don't. Another example would be getting involved in a shooting. And come on, let's be real here. That's a tragedy. Regardless of the parties, it is a tragedy. Any life that's lost, it's a tragedy. It's devastating, not just for the victim's family, right? But also for the law enforcement. But we don't think about it that way. We don't think about the cop's wife, their kids, and what they're going through, considering it's probably controversial. Well, he shot him in the back while he was running away. Who knows what the circumstances are, but I really feel that we can do a better job, especially the media, right? And us, all of us that are, influencers. And, now there's plenty that are so quick to pull the trigger and say, hey, that cop is bad. That cop did something wrong and they should be fully prosecuted, or they shouldn't be a cop whatsoever.
And then you have the whole aspect of social media only playing one part. They'll play the part where the cop's already mad, shooting through a window, without maybe the earlier part of the suspect pulling a gun first, and then that happens, and then they clip that. Because I've seen that.
Yeah.
Granted, I've also seen the other side where the cop was in the wrong, but there are a lot of situations where the cop was in the right. We just didn't see the first part.
Correct.
So it's equal.
Yeah, and you're bringing up a very, very good example. I think that Renee Good shooting in it itself, we don't even know his cell phone video. We haven't even seen that. Let's wait until this whole investigation carries out. We're just so quick to say, oh my God, he shot her through the window and, he's a bad cop. And again, then you get politics, egos, agendas, narratives where, we hate ICE. I mean, that's a whole different conversation. But to your point, one of the biggest pieces of evidence, right, that's so material to this particular shooting is his cell phone video. And guess what? We haven't even seen it.
Tell us about early on in your career when you first joined, what that was like those first few years.
Oh, man. As I reflect, chasing the radio, man, look, being a cop and working patrol today is probably no any different than when I did it 28 years ago. And I say that only to describe that the minute you log on, right, and you're in uniform, you get all your equipment, you're chasing that radio because everybody calls 911. I just had a guest not too far from here. He was in Rhode Island. He was a cop for 2 years. And he was explaining to me when he was working graveyard shift where they weren't even allowed to do any proactive work. Proactive work today is what we used to call observation work back in my days, where it's like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I remember my training officer, and I used to actually be in the Chevy before the Crown Vics, and this one Chevy had a spotlight. So if you see the Crown Victoria, the black and white police vehicles. So if I'm the passenger you have a handle for that main spotlight to be looking around. Well, this Chevy was so old, or older, I should say, that you actually, it was on the floor where you had to pick it up and do this number. So come 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, you're looking, man, and you're hunting. You know, what? Toyota Camry? Run the plate. Stolen. What? Honda Accord? For sure it's stolen, right? Or it's 2 o'clock in the morning on a main boulevard and you see that Honda Accord, because Honda Accords and Toyota Camrys way back in my days were the number one stolen vehicles in the entire, not just city of Los Angeles, probably the entire county. I can speak for a lot of my colleagues. They'll agree with me with this. And then you'll see, God, what's the violation? 16028, object hanging from a rearview mirror. Hey, we got to pull them over. And you pull them over, and next thing you know, it goes from this silly, low-level infraction that you just want to give a citation to getting them out of the car. Next thing you know, you find dope, money, guns, is what my training officer used to always teach me. You're going to find dope, you're going to find money, you're definitely going to find guns. And there you have it. And that's what police work was like back then. So the distinction is we don't do that much proactive work. And I guess I can only speak for myself because I still have colleagues that are in LAPD right now. And the other is because I've had guests as young as this kid who just, it wasn't that long ago where he gave up his career. Now he's, getting into comedy and acting, which is great, fascinating guy. But it's no different when you log on. Look, the fact of the matter is when you decide to do this profession, you have to know that you're in the business of resolving and going to crisis. And that's the best way that I can describe it. That is your job. You're confronted with crisis every single day. And guess what? I don't even know you, right? And I'm here to help you. I'm trying to protect you, and I have to serve you. And I love when you see all these YouTube videos where you're my boss, or I'm a taxpayer, so you're my boss. Okay, take it easy. It doesn't have to be all that, but it's no any different from that perspective, right? That we're in the business of crisis. The challenge is that today, again, it's just amplified by 100 when you have everybody out with their cell phones. You got First Amendment auditors, right? Those are huge. They didn't have that back in my days. So there's some distinctions, but at the end of the day, you know what? You're responding to the crisis, and guess what, man? You're risking your life. You might not come home one day. And I don't know about you, but for 80 grand, I don't know what, 100 maybe? I think ICE right now was offering like a $20,000 bonus. And I want to say their salary is 120 grand. And then with everything that's going on with the politics about ICE, federal agents, you want to risk your life and put your family through all this pandemonium, if you will, for 120 grand? I don't know. I kind of question myself if you want to do that.
Do you think that there was more conversations amongst officers of maybe possibly doing the wrong thing back in that time period, or debating on doing a wrong thing because there was no people watching with body cams or cell phones or anything?
Right. Good question. Yeah, there wasn't that much checks and balances. But look, that Rampart incident, we consider that to be a scandal. It's a law enforcement landmark incident. It really is. It hit throughout the nation. Everybody knows who Officer Rafael Perez is, and everybody knows what happens in this scandal. And we can talk about that later, about the project that I'm doing with that in particular. So, yeah, I don't think interesting you asked that, because there is a lot of media outlets and social media platforms, whether it's a podcast or, a leadership class, how do you identify, or how do you make sure, or is there early signs? I guess that's the best way to describe it, right? What red flags and early signs do you have when you know if a cop is going rogue? We can talk about, hiring standards. We can talk about, you know, I don't know, maybe sergeants showing up to your to every single call and kind of following you around. I don't know. It's kind of like micromanaging, but that's tough, man, because you're dealing with the human element. I mean, it has a lot to do with, your these provoking thoughts about you cutting corners. I mean, you shouldn't get into law enforcement if you think that you're going to be, desperate times call for desperate measures and cut corners and make more money. That's one of the main, and I know I'm segueing a little bit into corruption. I really think that a lot of departments throughout the United States, they don't pay you enough. And so what do? You start cutting corners and doing other stuff to supplement. There's cops out there that are making $20, $25 an hour. Well, that's probably not going to make it if you want to start a family and buy a house and do all that stuff. But yeah, it's harder to identify. What I should say is it was very, very challenging, in my opinion, to identify cops that can be rogue, right? That could cut corners, that are shady back then than it is today because of social media and because of body-worn video.
And back to the money, I think you see that with correctional officers specifically too, because they're paid even lower than most cops.
Yeah, there was, I want to say, and I don't have the numbers, but I want to say maybe 20% or maybe even less of police agencies in the United States have less than like 10 officers. It's you like 8 other officers, and probably in some little small town where you're not making enough money. So I would say correctional officers for sure. I mean, I can only imagine. I never applied for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Shout out to LASD, because I did not want to be in that environment. That just wasn't me. There's no way that I'm going through the entire academy, going through farms manipulation, farms qualification, shooting all that, and all of a sudden say, "Hey, congratulations, you graduated. Hey, you're going to jail. You're going to go work at a jail," where I have to secure my gun, and I got to deal with people who are living here for life, that are probably going to know who you are, your family, and everything about you because you didn't do them a favor, or you weren't going along with the program or the culture that's within that particular penitentiary. No, I'm good. I'm good. And that has got to be just wild. And I love the stories. Love the stories that I hear from your show. Hector Bravo was a great dude. I mean, it's sensationalized in a very good way because it educates you and it gives you information that you never had before. So the same thing happens with law enforcement, where we didn't know. We didn't know there was cops that had suicidal ideations. We didn't know that there was cops that suffer a lot from divorces and mental wellness, PTSD, this trauma, all that stuff back in my days, we didn't even have it. So now we're getting much better at it.
Do you think cops have a defining moment early on in their career that either makes them stay and will last a long time in their career, or will say, this isn't for me? And if so, what was that for you?
Good question. I asked that to my last guest, why he left within 2 years. I don't think there is, I would say probably the best way to describe it would be courage, or to self-reflect, to look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, this is not for me. I would say the majority of cops do this for all the right reasons, right? There's a lot of passion into helping people out, to protect and serve and all that good stuff. But yeah, everybody wants to make it to 20 years to collect your pension. So, but it is very rare that you'll get a young cop. Let's just take someone that's 21, 22 years old, and they didn't sign up for this. 3 years in, and you're working 80, 90 hours a week, and you're not sleeping. You're always working overtime, and you're the rookie, so you got to do everything. That's going to take a toll on you. And today there's more awareness about that than there was back in my days.
What's it feel like that, that first few months on the job when, you have the hard calls, you have those days you were just describing, and it hits you that you got to do 20 years of that to make a career out of that and retire?
Yeah. Well, lucky me that I come from an organization that there's a lot of jobs, right? So I was never one to always stay in patrol. And that just didn't, I got my ground, I got grounded and got the experience, but some of my friends will criticize me. Well, you never did enough, patrol time to make it to the next level. Uh, where I think it impacts the most is the ones that are to small to medium sized agencies. I'm talking 200 and less, maybe 100. I think 100, I consider that to be kind of small, but it's medium size where you're going to spend 20 or 30 years on patrol, which I admire for someone to do it for that long. Where nowadays there's probably cops that are just like, I've had it because the trauma, you're experiencing trauma. I think I heard, the research and the studies, and don't quote me on this, but we experience, I don't know, 100 times more trauma than the regular person does in a career. I should say numerous. I'm not going to put a number on it, but again, we're in the business of crisis and we see a lot of trauma, and that takes a toll on you. For me, you got to have coping mechanisms. For me, with soccer, I just needed, hey man, you know what? As long as I served like what I did between 18 to 24, I served, worked out, party, go to clubs, and had a great time up until I had to grow up at 25 years old and I joined the Navy. As long as you have an escape, I think you're going to be okay, right? Go play sports like I did. Soccer to me was my therapy. I played for the LAPD soccer team, and that was my way of like, with all my other partners, hey, what's up, bro? How you doing? How's work? And we would share like war stories, but more than anything, we had this interest, of being a team and going to win a gold medal at the local tournament. And so for me, that was my escape, working out. I've been reflecting lately about how it did affect me back then, but not to the point where I told myself, you know what, I want out. No, because it has afforded me so much success, Ian. It really has. I mean, look at me now. I collect a pension. I'm healthier. It does take a toll on you. And the podcast is up and running, and it's just growing every single day, where I'm allowed to kind of invite all my LAPD guests. A lot of them are LAPD alum. I want to say about 80% of my audience is LAPD, and they're watching from top to bottom about stories that you don't get to hear on police podcasts. So
What was your plan for your career when you're working those early years?
Get through patrol, work some specialized units, different projects. I was never really, I can never really sit still. I'm kind of one of those that needs to learn a lot. I wasn't really like, I'm going to stay here and just stay here, which, by the way, a lot of cops do, not just LAPD, in every agency, but there's specialized assignments. I think at one point I wanted to be work undercover. I did. I worked in undercover detail as an officer, where, oh my God, I just want to make detective and just, work an FBI task force or work and go after some serious violent criminals. I mean, that's what you sign up for. That's what you want to do, is catch bad guys. That's your job. But I ended up, like we talked about it, I got involved in the world of discipline and internal affairs. And I can tell you right now, there's nothing joyful of being in internal affairs. And I've been asked this before, where, well, why did you want to go to internal affairs? I can probably speak for the majority of cops, including your audience. I don't think anybody has a desire to, when they make sergeant, like, oh my God, I can't wait to go to internal affairs. It's not going to happen. You're either voluntold, right? It's very self-serving. In other words, I'm going to go and work internal affairs because it's a feather in the cap. I'm going to promote. This makes my package look good, right? And the other one is very self-serving, to the point where you say to yourself, well, it's Monday through Thursday. I work a 4-10, 4 days a week, 10 hours a day. I get Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off, or Saturday, Sunday, Monday off. It works for me. It works for my family. I got newborn, I'm doing diaper duty, so I got to be there for the wife. And what ends up happening is you start thinking about yourself so much that you forget that this particular assignment is a very serious one. It can cause pretty much your colleague's career if you don't turn every single stone when you investigate. There's a lot at stake, right? And I want to say, just from teaching the last couple of years, from doing a podcast and interviewing, I'm up to 270 thus far. We can do better, and it's a bit self-serving, but you need to know that your investigative methods and your skill set, it's vital, because they're depending on you, Sergeant, working internal affairs, to make sure that you investigate this fully. Because if you don't, I can start making assumptions. I can start speculating. I can make inferences that, yeah, you know what, let's suspend them or let's fire them. So it's a very serious role. And I'm trying very, very hard, which I'm doing, right, little by little, to tell people that, hey, if we're going to be working internal affairs, let's take it serious and do a very, very good job. No any different than you would responding to a radio call or doing a traffic stop for a minor infraction. So
now, is it like the TV shows and the movies where, like the field training officer is telling the young rookie, IA's the bad guys, or everyone's anti-IA? Was there that tension before you even joined?
Oh, 100%, absolutely. And there still is today. Glad you brought that up. We can only get a picture of this internal affairs role from movies and TV shows, right? And there's no winning with this role. Why? Because you have TV shows and movies that have that training officer say, don't go talk to those guys, because, they're assholes. They're bad people. They're evil. They're the Rat Squad, Blue Falcons. Don't deal with this. And stay away from them. So we have attached this negative stigma on this entity, a very important one, right, that has existed for decades till this very day. And there's no winning, because on these TV shows, you see what was that movie with Colin Farrell, where he was a cop, and he was, him and his, he's one of my favorite actors too. Edward
Scissorhands, or
no?
the Penguin?
No, I forgot the name of the actor. It was his brother, who was also a cop. They were both cops.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
King. Great movie.
I forgot the name. I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking. We'll think about it as we're having this conversation. So, in that movie, this dude is just, doing all kinds of shady shit as a cop. And so he gets caught by internal affairs. And so his job is to go in there to lie and no, fuck those guys, right? That's the mentality, right? Or what ends up happening is, if you're liked, right? Or if you're the chief's son, or you're connected, you're within that group where you're very, very well liked, well, they're going to cover for you. So there's really no winning when you depict internal affairs, because the public, the community, thinks that we're covering up for our officers. I mean, think about it. Someone can walk in the station right now. How big is Dansbury? Is there a police department out? How big is your police department out here?
The city's like 100,000 people. Danbury is, it's probably, I think it's a pretty big department.
Okay.
I mean, they have different divisions. They have.
Right. How big is Dansbury, would you say, just ballpark?
100,000 people.
What about sworn police officers?
Oh, I couldn't tell you the number. I know they're always hiring.
Yeah.
But I was just talking, I had a state trooper on the show a couple episodes prior to this. He was saying that they never really had to respond to Danbury because they were so locked in. Like they had homicide division. They had all of these different divisions that were just really dialed in because it's a bigger department.
Right.
But you go to a place like Richfield,
Uh-huh.
they don't have anything. I think the crime stats they just posted,
Uh-huh.
most of the calls they respond to are speeding, traffic tickets.
Okay, let's take Richfield. We just say it's less than 50 officers, maybe 100?
Yeah, it's got to be.
It's
It
got to
can't
be
even
less
be
than
that
50.
much. Yeah,
Right, so
yeah.
let's just take that as an example. So here you are in Richfield, someone does a traffic stop, cop pulls him over, and he's just not cool at all. Has an attitude. His disposition's all like, yeah, whatever, right? His approach, hard, and you want to make a complaint because, which by the way, it happens all the time where I don't want to talk to you, you know? And so this cop is kind of being like an little a-hole, right? And so you walk into the local police department, the lobby, and say, hey, I want to make a complaint against an officer at that traffic stop he just did. He was just very rude. He was offensive, really offended me with the things that he said. Luckily, we have body-worn video to prove that whatever it is that you're saying, probably not the way it went down, right? So let's just take that example. Well, that's the problem. We think, we meaning the public, will go and do that, and all of a sudden here comes a sergeant. Okay, well, if the sergeant comes out with his notepad and he's in uniform, well, the first thing I'm going to be thinking is, well, you're going to be investigating this? Well, how am I going to get a fair shot at this? For all I know, you're just going to take all my information down and go through the motions and nothing's going to happen. And let's just consider under this scenario that maybe the cop was rude, disrespectful, and, yanked her out of the car for no reason. Let's just say there is true, legitimate, alleged misconduct, violation of policy, neglect of duty, and even conduct on becoming an officer, right? It's you just can't drag people out of the car because of an infraction. You watch body-worn video. Well, she showed you, a driver's license, insurance, and registration. So let's just say it is a legitimate, alleged misconduct. Well, if I walk in, the first thing I'm going to think, well, if you're the sergeant and you're investigating your own, I'm not going to get a fair shot at this. So what happens is that, and the point that I'm trying to drive home is, we as community members don't really trust that you're going to be investigating this fully, right? And so what ends up happening is, well, how do we ensure that we are not acting like that and having an approach like that? Well, it will be probably the best thing to do is to maybe get both parties together, with a neutral mediator, come in a room and say, okay, Ian, what happened at this traffic stop? Who would like to go first to talk about this traffic stop? Because I'm here to tell you, there's a lot of misunderstanding when things happen with cops. There really is. Just because a cop is very firm, has a lot of command presence, and for you should probably think that he's kind of like being a dick, or he's acting like an asshole. That's just my demeanor. That's just the way I conduct business. That's the way you should conduct business, right? I don't know who you are, which, by the way, I keep thinking about traffic stops is because if you don't know, now you know, right, is traffic stops are probably, maybe some of my colleagues will challenge me, are probably the most inherently dangerous situation that a cop can get involved, absent, or I should say, except maybe like a domestic violence incident that you're responding to. The advantage you have there is you got the comments of the call. I think they call it CAD, you know who's calling 911, it's the victim or maybe a witness saying that, hey, they're beating me up. There's weapons. There's a lot of information and description of that call that you're responding to. So you have some awareness. You got some game planning, right? Some tactical issues that you're going to apply when you respond to this call. But on a traffic stop, I don't know who you are. So hell yeah, I'm going to be very firm. I don't know what you have in that. I don't even know who you are. And so that raises, not only red flags, but it raises your suspicion, if you will, about whether or not you have, weapons. Who knows what could happen at a traffic stop? I'm sure we've seen plenty on YouTube. So,
do you remember that first case you investigated when you got into IA?
Okay, let me reach in the Rolodex. It's an old term.
I know what a Rolodex is.
It used to. It's kind of like a little plastic. How can I explain it? Like a box where they're like business card size,
Yeah.
and you roll it to get the information of the people
Yeah.
of your contacts. So you roll it. It's a Rolodex. Only old school guys will know that. God, that's a very, very good question. I want to say it was two young officers, barely off probation. The men must have had like 2 years on, where the one officer decided and orchestrated, premeditated, and planned to get his car burned so that he can make an insurance claim. However, his partner, his classmate, this was all planned on that one particular day. He didn't know about it until he started realizing that he calls him up and he says, "Hey, bro, let's go have beers and watch the playoffs, NFL playoffs game." Okay, cool, right? So they go to the local bar. He goes, "But hey, do me a favor, bro. Can you drive separate? Because I'm going to go drop my car off at my buddy's house because it needs some fixing, got some maintenance to do." Yeah, not a problem. So this one particular officer didn't know anything, right? So then he's waiting in the car for his partner, right? This is the accused, who decides to drop off the car, and he meets with another unknown individual. They're dapping each other. "Hey, what's up, bro?" Boom, 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 all that stuff. And he hands him over his keys. And he's like, okay, no big deal, right? So they go to the local sports bar. They have drinks. And then after that, God, I want to say while he's driving him home, he calls the local police department, because it wasn't LAPD. This was outside of the city of Los Angeles, to report his car was stolen. And his partner's looking at him like, right? Shortly after that, he calls his insurance company to report it. No, after that, I want to say within maybe 15, 20 minutes, it was shortly thereafter where the CHP calls and says, "Hey, we've recovered your vehicle on the side of the roadway here on this highway, and it's completely burned." Okay. His partner's listening to all this, while he's talking to the CHP officer. Then he makes the call to make the insurance claim. After he gets off the phone, he tells his partner, "Hey, bro, I got to tell you what happened," right? And he lets him in on his scheme, on his plan. Poor guy. Now, what is he to do? Well, he doesn't report it. He does not report the misconduct whatsoever. And so what ends up happening is LAPD finds out about it. It is a criminal investigation. So what happens is first you got to do the crim, and then you move on over to the admin. They file criminal charges on the main accused employee and, Lisa department. I'm taking you back. This happened, I want to say 23, 24 years ago. However, the department went after the partner, and the poor kid, right? I want to say he was on probation still. So when you're a probationary employee, this happens not just in the state of California, but this happens a lot in other major states. You're an at-will employee. You are not vested and you have no rights. So the department can get rid of you for whatever reason. If you're not fit for duty, we're out. Well, it just so happens that this happened during his probationary period. They found out about it. And because it was egregious, it was reckless, there is causation to fire this officer. They decided to do, he opted for a hearing. And that was my job in internal affairs, was to put on these hearings where officers were facing termination. And that was my first one, bro. And this kid, I got to tell you, man, watching a cop just get all emotional and lose it all and be remorseful, like when he was testifying in front of the panel. It's a 3-member panel. We call it the border rights hearing. It's no any different than an arbitration hearing or a civil service commission hearing when you get terminated as a law enforcement officer. And it hit me, man. I want to say my time in internal affairs, which the majority of my time was spent just putting on these hearings, putting on these trials. Basically, I was like a prosecuting attorney without me even having a license, going up against all these big badass criminal defense attorneys, real good attorneys. But man, my heart just broke, bro. You want to talk about an emotional roller coaster for me, because I'm very energetic. I love to laugh. Sense of humor in law enforcement is super important. And so I'm that guy. I'm that officer where we're always trying to make fun of things because of all the trauma, the things we were talking about. But yeah, dude, he ended up getting fired. And, now that I'm reflecting on it, I kind of wish I know, what's going on with his life now. But yeah, that was my first one. And then came about 30 more in 3 years, little more than 3 years, 30. Now, what's important for your audience to know, when we start talking about misconduct, we start talking about row cops and all that. Out of the 30 hearings that I did, the majority of them were for termination. In other words, the chief of police has pretty much said, I'm going to direct you to this hearing. My recommendation is removal, but I'm going to leave it up to these board members. You're going to go through a whole trial. They're going to listen to all the testimony. They're going to examine all this evidence that gets introduced, this whole nine. If they make the decision to terminate you, I can either do two things. I can agree or I can lower the penalty, right? And out of the 30, there was only 5 that actually recommended termination. And of course, the chief agreed. And those 5 involved false statements, lying, perjury, untruthfulness, dishonesty. People call it different terms. And yeah, you and I can agree, we don't want liars. We don't. I don't think anybody wants a liar to do this type of job. I suppose in any profession. But as a cop, you can't lie, man. You got to go. And so I have to ask myself, and to this very day, I still do, is that, well, okay, Marlon, what happens with those other 25 that you did? Well, those other 25 is probably one of the main reasons I wanted to do this podcast. It's because we don't always get it right. Point number 1. Point number 2, it's not so much that we don't get it right, but it's also is, why did we put this officer, this accused colleague of ours, through a year, maybe 2 years of hell all by himself, right? Or herself. We didn't check up on him, right? And okay, they violated some policy. Big deal. Maybe this should have been handled at the precinct. I know you guys call it precinct out here, but this should be handled at the department level. It doesn't have to come all the way up here after waiting, a year and a half of stress all by yourself in the dark alley, no one telling you what to do. Oh, and by the way, your order not to talk to anybody. That's the order. And you can't even go home and tell your loved ones, let alone your wife. And so that's what motivated me to talk about this process, because I'm telling you, brother, there are so many officers out there right now, active and retired, that have come in and they want to come in and say, you know what? Let me tell you what the department put me through, only to get it wrong. Now, have I had guests where they said, let me take some accountability for what I did? I have, but not many, right? And so we always want to point fingers to the department did this to me, and the department's out to get me. Okay, let's take it back a little bit, because that could be the case. And I'm here to tell you, I worked internal affairs. I'm here to tell you that is the case. However, let's not make this function or this process out to be this monster where it's happening like everywhere throughout the United States. It's not. I just told you, 18,000 agencies, north of 800,000 officers. I mean, yeah. Is there corruption? Of course there is. You know, are cops shady? Yeah, there is, but it's not many. And so what I think the point that we're missing when we start talking about this topic is that it doesn't happen all the time where we think that, oh my God, you know, all these cops are dirty. We just talked about this sensationalism with social media, right? If something happens in Dansbury, you know, and it's sensationalized, well, hell, it's happening all over Connecticut.
What would you say was the number one investigation that comes up for these individuals facing internal affairs?
False statements. You have to get it right. As a department, your responsibility is to ensure that when we are accusing one of our colleagues of lying, you better get it right. And when I say you better get it right, I'm talking about the standard of proof is preponderance of the evidence, 51%, more likely than not. Got that part, right? Well, I kind of think they're lying. Okay, well, what you should be thinking about as an adjudicator, so forget investigating, and I have my thoughts about how to investigate a false statement, a dishonesty type of statement. But as an adjudicator, meaning the person who's going to make the decision of this outcome of these allegations, false statements being the number one type of allegation that's going to ruin your entire, not just career, your entire life. We need to get it right. My thinking is, and I say this all the time, you got to crank that up. You better crank it up to like 90%. And what I mean by that is if Ian, Marlon, and who's your partner's name? I forgot his name.
Oh, Matt.
Matt, and who's your other?
Letitia,
and then there's another individual here.
Yeah, Jad works for himself.
Yeah, okay. So you have 4. If you have 4 witnesses that can say that, you know what, that officer, yes, he threw her up against the wall. Let's just say there's no body-worn video for whatever reason. Yeah, they took it out of the car and threw up against the wall. That's okay. Got it. That's a substantial amount of evidence to prove that you lied, especially if you told the department you wrote your report. No, I never, at the traffic stop, did not exit the vehicle and did not use force. That's pretty bad, right? And again, I know I'm giving you a little bit of an example. There's body-worn video in the whole 9 to prove whether it's going to be demonstrably false or you actually did that. But my point is that when we decide to investigate a false statement, we need to know the motives and the intentions or why you would lie. In other words, if you're going to be deceitful to the department, you know, how much value is it to you, accused officer, to lie? Like, why would you want to lie? And we don't, as I'm telling you from experience, we're not that good. We're not that good at investigating these particular types of allegations. Yeah. I can tell you homicide detectives are very good, right? Robbery, people who have a lot of experience are very good at what? Getting a confession. And I always compare this. Look, can you imagine if you and I are homicide detectives and we're going to walk into your other room and here he is. He's wanted for 3 murders. Patrol finally caught him after you and I wanting to catch this murderer for a year, 2 years. You and I are going to go walk in that room and there's only going to be three outcomes. 1, they're going to confess, right? 2, they're going to lie. Or 3, they're going to invoke the right, say, you know what, I want my lawyer. I don't want to talk to you anymore, right? We don't do that with our own colleagues. We don't walk in a room and say, if they're going to lie, we need to kind of open up the doors and kind of find out what are your intentions, what are your motives, why would you be deceitful? You know, kind of take me back and explain this to me. You know, my point is there's an art and there's a skill set for you to tell, me being the investigator, right? internal affairs investigator, to tell my bosses that, you know what, Ian lied and Marlon lied, right? You might get inconsistent statements. The culture and the practice amongst internal affairs, and it's not just LAPD, bro. I'm telling you, this is happening all up and down, not just California. This happens throughout the nation. The investigator will go ahead and ask, do the formal compelled interview. They'll ask all the questions, maybe open up the door and ask these questions. They probably weren't real thorough with it, and they'll turn it in, and they'll probably ask themselves, there was a little bit misleading on this part. I kind of felt that he or she lied. Kind of, not really, but I didn't get clarity. What you should be doing is do a subsequent interview and ask the hard questions, but we don't. We turn it in, and here you are as an adjudicator, and you say, you know what? They're lying. Go ahead and add that dishonesty allegation, and let's fire them without blinking an eye. That's unfair. We can do much better, and I am so critical about this I'm so passionate about this with law enforcement. People watch and listen and say, well, that's not true. Or someone says, I guarantee you someone in your audience is going to say, you know what? He's right, because I'm always constantly getting phone calls and I'm getting DMs of people are telling me that, you know what? I went through all this. And by the way, they treated me like a suspect. Another example would be an officer-involved shooting. I ask this all the time. I teach OIS. I used to teach OIS investigation course, scene management, when IA Internal Affairs arrives at a scene of an officer-involved shooting. How do officers get treated? Are they suspects or are they victims? I don't know. We're our worst enemies, bro. It happens to us all the time. Let's take an example, maybe in a prison yard. Same thing, right? If they like you, you might be a victim. But if they don't like you, they're going to treat you like a suspect. Let's say the tower. I've always been fascinated by this. And I asked all my correctional officer, my CO buddies, dude, you guys are in the tower with like AR-15s and fight breaks out in the yard, getting shanked or something. You're going to take that shot? Me, dude? There's no way. I have to trust you to fucking line your sights up. You better hit the target, bro. I haven't done the research, but I can only imagine there has been some accidents.
I'm sure they're not all reported.
Oh yeah, hey, you know what? Don't record that. There had to have been some accidents where you line up your targets and you shoot, and dude, you shot one of your partners, accidental discharge. Well, we call it negligent discharge. That's my point. Or one of these COs is heavy-handed. We call it batch heavy. I mean, come on, man. It's bad. Let's face it. But we don't treat them that way. It just depends. So let's just say there is a shooting, right? Or there is a stabbing and someone dies, right? So you have an in-custody death or an officer-involved shooting, right? How do we treat your colleague? How do we treat that officer or deputy? Do we treat them as victims or do we treat them as suspects? And that's the same thing. That's the example I'm trying to drive home, that when we accuse our own colleagues of lying, you're treating them like a suspect. You're not even giving them the benefit of the doubt. Hey, man, people lie all the time. All the time. You just got to find out to see if this lie is solid. It solidifies the evidence, right? The preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not. Hey, boss, I know it's 51%. It's more likely than not. But I have more evidence. I have 4 witnesses. I got surveillance cameras, all as evidence to prove that they lied. And guess what? I gave them 3 bites of the apple. I did a subsequent interview, and I sat there and I said, you know what, Officer Marrache? You are lying to me. It's not an easy job, dude. Who the hell wants to work internal affairs and do that? Accusing your colleague of being a liar. You know what? You lied to me. So let's back up, and I'm going to ask you the questions again, because I want to get this. There's some misrepresentation of facts. There's some misunderstanding of what happened. So why don't you take me back when you were transporting the arrestee from the station to the heliport when you walked into the correctional facility. So I'm going to ask you again. We already went through this 2 months ago, and there seems to be some misrepresentation. And here's what you said. Here's the evidence. Don't hide the ball. Talk about transparency, right? We're not. What do we do instead of internal affairs? We hide the ball. We look at you like you're a fucking liar, and you wonder why internal affairs gets such a bad rap and this negative stigma that has been attached for decades, bro.
Now, these lying investigations, how do they get started? How do they come across your desk? And what's that process?
Good point. In my experience, probably the most common would be getting involved in a DUI, not just a DUI. Let's just say an off-duty officer gets arrested. Perfect example, right? Domestic incident or even a DUI. And here you are telling the officers that, no, I only had one shot of vodka at home. I wasn't driving, whatever those statements are. So the arresting officer writes in their report what you said. Well, lo and behold, you took care of, let's just go with DUI. You took care of everything criminal. You got your license suspended. You got to go to AA meeting, whatever those conditions are. Now comes the admin. Well, if I'm in an interview, you better tell me the truth. Like, you need to fall on the sword. You blew .22s. Okay, I have a receipt that you were at the local bar before you actually went home. You said you had 2 shots of vodka at home. So I'm giving you the opportunity. So that would be one way, right? Where it starts right at the beginning. The other one, unfortunately, is what we've been talking about a lot, is it happens during a compelled official investigation. If I'm interviewing you, right, Officer Bick, in this compelled investigation, I'm the internal affairs investigator. If you lie to me, then I'm going to frame and write up the allegation of a false statement. That's where it derives from most of the time, because we as investigators have this feeling we have facts. I'm going to be critical because we don't have that many facts, right? As I just explained, but we have facts to believe that you lied.
But why are you talking to them to begin with?
Because there is some alleged misconduct. So let's just say, look, alleged misconduct is defined as violation of policy, neglect of duty, conduct unbecoming, right? And a criminal offense. So if you get arrested, any criminal offense, it's an automatic IA investigation. If you violate policy, doesn't necessarily have to be an internal affairs investigation. Just depends how egregious that policy violation is. If you neglected your duties, okay, so I don't know, you're supposed to, you had a couple of service calls that you didn't respond to because you were sleeping, or you parked in the red, parked on the red on the side of the street when you were supposed to while you were out there bullshitting, whatever. Just neglect. It's kind of like violating policy, but you were neglectful of your duties. You failed to do something. You failed to conduct a thorough investigation. You failed to do this and you failed to do that. And then last but not least, conduct unbecoming, right? Unbecoming conduct of an officer, anything that reflects negative. We're in the business of things not looking good. Remember I mentioned that? Hey, it doesn't look good. Well, that's an IA. It just depends how reckless and how egregious that not looking good. Well, hell, it's all over social media and you are at the bar in your skivvies with your fucking badge hanging and you're partying, taking shots, okay, that doesn't look good. That's unbecoming conduct, right? Things like that. So now we have to investigate. So the chief or admin, right, command staff decides, let's go ahead and initiate an internal affairs investigation. So as the process goes, within the next couple of months, you're going to be compelled. I'm going to tell you that you have to you have to participate in this investigation. I'm making you do it. I'm compelling you to do it. And in that Q&A volley, right, let's take that bar example. you don't really tell me the truth. I kind of feel like you're misrepresenting certain facts. There is a strong possibility or a fair probability that I might end up, me as the investigator, framing an allegation of dishonesty.
So when you find out someone's lying and you could prove it, say they lied about a case with a suspect, for example,
Mhm.
do you go and then reopen up all of their old cases?
Good. I had a case like that. We didn't, because under the circumstances of the one that I presided and, presented to the board members in a hearing, those investigations, he did put false information on a follow-up investigation. They weren't filings. They weren't in the process of a criminal proceeding. But yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. It just depends on the circumstances. I mean, to answer your question would be, yeah, it depends. If you are, that's more like perjury. If that's great evidence, right? I mean, come on, you got an arrest report that's completely false. Yes, I think I'm going to tell the district attorney or the local county attorney, we need to start looking at all their other cases because there's a strong possibility that they pretty much forged or, they misrepresented and gave misleading statements and perjured themselves or even, testifying, perjury. That's more perjury. That's solid evidence. I'm talking about not necessarily a criminal proceeding, if you will. I'm just talking about certain statements that you make while you're telling me the story of that traffic stop or that service call, where I, as the investigator, feel like, you're misrepresenting these facts. So for me, everything starts off with misleading or misrepresenting. In other words, you're giving me information where I believe that what happened factually, it's not the way it went down. So it's my responsibility as an investigator to let you, accused, know that, hey, I'm giving you an opportunity to clear up this misunderstanding or this misrepresentation. Or I think that you're lying, Ian, so I'm going to give you an opportunity. Here's all the evidence. As a matter of fact, let's take a break with your attorney. I want you to watch the body-worn video again, right? That's what you should be doing as an investigator. So that is what I'm talking about more than just, to your example, where if a cop is, perjured themselves or wrote a report that's completely false. Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm doing an audit on all his arrests for like the last, 2 or 3 years, depending on how far we want to go back.
But do you find that there's a comparison or similarity between someone that's willing to maybe misrepresent a story versus going as far as, committing perjury on evidence? Because I'm sure there's public listening into this right now, and they're thinking, well, if he's willing to not be totally fully honest with you in internal affairs, what goes to say that, he's botched a case or her?
Right. As long as we keep in mind to your audience that botching a case doesn't happen quite often. It doesn't. I mean, LAPD at one point was 10,200. I haven't had a perjury case. I had one where they boilerplated, a motor officer did, of the stop, and he wasn't the arresting officer. You could have caught that, but we didn't. But he got fired for providing a false statement. I totally get what you're saying, but
I guess the question goes then to the misrepresentations that they say to you. Does that affect the outcome of the person, say they pulled over or whatever's case?
Yes, as long as, absolutely. But you also got to keep in mind, depending on your agency, right, whether it's a small, medium, or even large, you have checks and balances. So you writing up a report, you have that major responsibility that everything that you're actually writing is factual, true, and correct. Okay? And by the way, omitting facts is not a lie. You just didn't put like real important information about this traffic stop or that service call, whatever the case may be. However, you have your sergeant, you have a watch commander, you have command staff, depending on where you're at, you have a lieutenant, you got a captain, you got a deputy chief, you even have the chief. I mean, that's a lot of levels of review for you to get it wrong and perjure yourself. So the responsibility is really, I should say, accountability goes all the way. And we preach this accountability. Oh my God, we're so accountable. No, you're not. However, keep in mind that it doesn't really happen that often. At least, well, I guess the best way to put it is that no one's been caught yet, right? No one's been caught yet. And maybe there is. Again, it's a very heavy, curious topic of law enforcement that we don't get to have a conversation about. But at the same time, just bear in mind that it's a very small fraction of the population when you look at it from a 30,000-foot view.
Interesting. Now, the cops that get fired from one department, do you think that they should be so easily be able to get rehired at another department?
Good question. No.
Because that happens. I mean,
Yeah.
look at the case with the guy that just got convicted of murder with the woman with the boiling water. He was fired from another department.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. That's a great case. That dude was, I want to say, it was like 4 different departments. And I think there's facts in one department where he was like on a pursuit or something like that. Dude, and he totally, like, the sergeant, he was like a dick to him. Like, yeah, whatever. That case, the Grayson case.
Yeah. Officer
Grayson, it's a fascinating case. To say that, yeah, he got convicted, which, by the way, he gets convicted for first-degree murder because of premeditation and deliberation, meaning, and cops need to know this, don't break leather, draw your weapon until she wasn't even a suspect. We're going to call her a victim, right? Yeah, I don't even think she was a suspect. It was a call where there was prowling in or around the neighborhood. So he door knocks and they come in the house. But as a cop, you can't look at this victim, call her whatever you want to identify her as, and say, put that fucking water down, because I'm going to fucking shoot you in the head. That's like pretty much telling someone that you're planning and you're like premeditating to actually shoot with the intentions to either cause serious bodily harm or even kill him, which is one of the reasons, well, it's probably the sole reason why he got convicted for first-degree murder, which is very unusual. A very good case. Very, very, very unusual for a cop to get convicted on first-degree murder. Again, in the state of Illinois, they have their own statutes. The wording, if it's one thing I learned in law school, words have meanings. And you got to read word by word of the statute. However, the statute is pretty similar to California and other states. But that's not the case with a lot of cops. I can tell you from officer-involved shootings, I think the most you've gotten is probably manslaughter, right? Maybe second degree, but the majority fall under that category of manslaughter, voluntary or involuntary, criminal negligence, something along those lines, not first degree. But yeah, that is a fascinating case, knowing that he kept getting hired from other agencies. And my understanding is that in the state of Illinois, these are all temporary agencies where you're not here permanent. It's kind of like trying you out. You're kind of like a free agent. NBA, they have like 10-day contracts.
Yeah, like in sports. Yeah,
yeah, like in sports, something like that. Where we're going to try you out, but we're not sure if we're going to offer you a permanent job, which kind of sucks. But yes, state of California, along with Illinois, they mirror a lot of our laws and statutes now, where if you get involved in excessive use of force, like you can say abuse of power, they have fancy words for it. But even in an officer-involved shooting, you can be up for decertification or revocation of your license. In other words, you can't be a cop anymore in this state. And that has taken an effect on the majority of states throughout the nation. So, yeah, man, I don't know how and why. As a matter of fact, there was a chief. I think the last chief of police was warned and he was told. But hey, man, the chief has the ultimate decision to hire you.
I mean, are they doing background checks? Say you have someone come in from a different state that wants to transfer from their department, or
They do.
they are doing that.
Yeah, interesting point you bring up, because even on a psychological evaluation test, which is right before you get hired, you can have these psychologists make a recommendation to the chief. I don't think this is a good hire. Hey, I'm telling you my professional opinion. This is probably not the guy that you want to hire because of this, and this. But the ultimate decision maker is the chief. We have what? Shortages on officers. I guess you could say desperate times calls for desperate measures, right? It just depends. And in this particular case, yeah, man, this dude should have never been hired in the first place. And to top it all off, in regard to this case, there was a news clip, where a story in the news where they interviewed the chief. And he tried to say, well, I leave it up to my lieutenant to do all the hiring. No, time out. No, chief. You know who has the ultimate decision to hire or fire people? You do. You know who has the ultimate decision of the outcome of an internal affairs investigation? You do. So don't well, I delegate duties, which is fine. As a chief of police, you got to delegate duties because there's a lot going on. You got a lot of responsibilities. One of those responsibilities is to know who you're actually hiring. I told my girlfriend time when that came out, I go, give it about 2 or 3 months. That chief is canned. And he did. He got fired, or I think he either resigned because there's no way.
Now, don't sometimes a department will make a deal with someone that they want to fire or get rid of, where it's like you could just quit or resign, and then doesn't that affect separating good cops from bad ones? What do the kids say now?
Cringe. They call it cringe. What the kids call it. I call it nails on a chalkboard. It gets to me, and here's the reason why. If we keep preaching accountability and transparency, those are 2 buzzwords in law enforcement that are so popular. It gets said all the time, right? No, you decide to do an egregious act, lie, abuse of power, excessive force, beating a handcuffed suspect for apparently no reason, right? You need to go. No. You're not retiring. You're not. You shouldn't do that. If I were chief of police, I would get together with city council, right? All the major stakeholders of that city, along with the police union, and write into a contract, a written agreement. We call it MOAs, memorandums of agreements, MOU, memorandums of understanding. Get all of us into an agreement that if you commit alleged misconduct and we open up an internal affairs investigation, guess what? You can't leave. You can't leave until that whole process is over. That I would have that written in policy. Now, what I won't have written is say, you know what? You want to leave, wipe your hands clean and just take off, maybe go in front of the department, or because I have so much political pressure, that, hey, just kind of slide out, and I already talked to the chief and the neighbor agency. They'll hire you, you're good to go. No, you know what? Go walk in to roll call in front of all your partners and apologize, because of you, the impact of this incident has had on the community, on your colleagues, is so outrageous, right? It's so big, right? It's so huge, it's so sensationalized that you need to take accountability. There is no accountability. I don't like it, and I've been doing that a lot on YouTube. When I go to YouTube and do my little, breakdowns, I always go to Grok. Grok is my Grok 3, baby. I'm a Grok guy. All I do is say, hey, give me the latest terminations and resignations. It'll pop up. And a lot of them just quit and resign. And so I feel the need to, hey, man, if you're going to call me the IA guy and I'm all about internal affairs, hey, we take care of each other. No, I'm going to tell you about the ones that we need to hold accountable, because we don't. They just walk away. It's not right.
Now, what about the officers that are, say, at year 19 or just about to retire and they do a wrongful act? They either end up in prison or they get fired. Do they deserve their pension? How do you think about that?
Yeah. So pension systems are different. What I do know, I can only speak for the city of Los Angeles. If you're pending some type of criminal offenses, is a little different. But if you're pending any type of administrative misconduct, you're still eligible to get your pension. As a matter of fact, as long as you make the years in service to get, where you're eligible for a pension, you can just walk away, which is what a lot of these accused employees do. I just don't think that's right. And then look at yourself, do some self-reflection. I mean, you have to live that for the rest of your life. You beat up the handcuff suspect, and now we all have to suffer the impact of how negative that is.
Now,
Because, you know,
Now, those types of suspects, what's the psychology behind them when you get to talk to them and you spend time with them? Because I'm sure you have.
Interesting question. What I will say is that during my times in patrol, when you act up and act stupid and think you're all hard, bro, the minute we put on handcuffs and put you in the backseat of a black and white, there's this moment of Jesus, and you either cry or you say, "I'm sorry." That's what I get. And again, good point. Accountability goes both ways. No one's accountable. A lot of these internal affairs complaints, to your point, these public complaints, I want to say from 2011 to 2015, when I worked internal affairs, we had an excess of north of, I want to say close to 4,000 citizen complaints, public complaints. 97%, 96.4, let's round it off. 97% of all those internal affairs complaints came back unfounded, which means that it didn't occur.
How do you sort through that and pick what's right or...
Right. Well, you fully investigate, right? And again, it's all about that misunderstanding. Could be, right? Now, let's put on the internal affairs hat. Here I am at the local 7-Eleven. I'm a sergeant and I'm getting my cup of coffee. Next, this person comes up to me and says, "Hey, Sarge, these two officers down the street, I saw them in a police vehicle. They took them out. They pulled someone over and they threw them up against a wall." That's pretty serious, right? Okay. Hey, Mr. Johnson, let me get your information. Give me about 24, 48 hours to do a preliminary investigation to see if this actually happened. Okay, I'll get back to you. So then I go and check body-worn video. Guess what? Never happened. None of that ever happened. So then I call back Mr. Johnson and say, "Hey, Mr. Johnson, you know what? Would you like to come in the station? You know what? I actually have the body-worn video here. I'm having quite a hard time kind of understanding what you saw because that's not what happened. Would you like to come in and let's talk about this?" Mr. Johnson's gone through the wind. They won't come in. They don't. Those 3,000, 4,000 that I told you about, when we investigate and the case is closed, we send a letter to the address you've given us. You know how many times a complainant has actually called us to discuss? 0. So the accountability also goes to the person making the complaint. Again, maybe there is this misunderstanding about your attitude, your approach, your disposition, and your demeanor when you had that traffic stop or when you went to that service call.
What do you think is the most common one or the most egregious one that they call?
The common, well, I make fun of this one. It always happens. Not always, but I remember I investigated one where there was a motor officer that said, gives a ticket. It's got sunglasses and all. And they come into the front lobby. You know what? I want to make a complaint against that officer because he was rude and disrespectful. And I was very offended by him. And then you ask, "Okay, ma'am, what is it that he did?" "Well, you know what? The way he took off his sunglasses, just the way he tilted them and put them on his forehead and the way he looked at me, I was just so offended by that." Yes. Those are the kind of complaints that you get. You're like, come on, right? We're going to spend all this time and effort to do a full-blown internal affairs investigation where we should just be having a conversation about, no, that's not misconduct. Maybe he could have done things different, right? We can always get better at it. But yeah, it happens. That happens a lot. I want to say traffic stops only because you and I can agree that no one likes to get pulled over by a cop. You really think that you and I, if we're driving right now, okay, here somewhere, and we ran a red light and then we saw the cop, you think we're going to pull over and say, hey, officer, you know what? We ran a red light. So why don't you come over here and investigate and give us a ticket? No, it doesn't happen that way.
Well, maybe you will because you're the former cop, but I definitely am not.
Right, I wouldn't either. You don't do your job. You know, my point is that it's you're on the defense from the get-go, 100%. And like I mentioned in the past, that is very, very critical and very important, is that traffic stops are definitely the most inherently dangerous situations for a police officer because you don't know what you're walking up to.
Was there ever a case where you knew that person was guilty of whatever you were accusing them of, but you couldn't prove it?
Are you talking internally, or are you just talking to me being patrol and
Internally? Yeah.
internally? No, it's hard to say. Yeah, no, because
You were just that good at your job, Marlon.
yeah, I was that good. No, I would say if you when you can violate policy every single day. I know a lot of cops call it general orders, I should say, GOs is what they say. Yeah, you violate policy all the time. Hey man, if I'm working the streets right now and my policy is that I can't talk on my cell while I'm in my patrol car, well, my wife is on her 37th week of being pregnant and her bag's going to break any minute and she's got to go to the it's an emergency. It's an exigent circumstance phone call. And she calls me. I don't care if I'm at a stop sign. I'm talking to my wife. Did I violate policy? Yeah, of course I did. So no, I think the majority of cops always do the right thing. We do this profession to be there for a person that's in crisis, right? Now, how you handle that crisis, yeah, you could be a total asshole about it, right? Or you can be very professional, or you can be very disrespectful. It just depends on the person. Again, we're hiring from the human element.
Now, body cams from an IA perspective, do you guys care how the officers necessarily talking, not towards the suspect, but amongst themselves? I mean, if things get heated, they're on a scene, they're swearing, maybe. Are you guys concerned with that? Or
no, we call that tactical foul language, bro. That's what we call it. And no, I think that if you are running into a person who is perfect example would be you go to a call where they're attempting suicide. You know, they got the knife in the middle of the street and they're suffering from a mental episode and they're just dropping F-bombs and not even listening to you. Yeah, you got to drop some F-bombs to make sure that, hey, go ahead and put that knife down. Or it just depends. You have to have what I call this responsivity principle, where sometimes, not all the time, you want to adapt to the style and the modality of the circumstances where you're confronted with a suspect and or a victim. It just depends, right? But if it requires for you to go to that level to de-escalate and get them to comply to your orders, hey, I don't want to use force. You know, you can't just walk up and say, you know, Mr. Johnson, you know, my name is Officer Marrache, and I got called because you apparently there is people saw you beating up person here at the bus stop. What my, you know, and he starts going off on you. Well, you know what? You being all professional, it's probably not going to. And he has a knife, right? You back up. Hey, drop that knife. You got to step it up, or you know, be responsive to probably his level or her level, depending on the suspect, to try to de-escalate that.
Do you think the department should always put out the footage when an incident happens?
Law transparency is really good with the public. And so there are statutes and laws in states, obviously in California, where you have to put out a briefing or a community, I think we call it community briefings, within 30 to 45 days of the incident. But it's got to be a critical incident. Critical incident meaning OISs, officer-involved shootings, in custody deaths, right? And or any type of a excessive force, any of those type. That would be when you have a situation where you are effecting an arrest and you're just tuning this suspect up and it's all on film and that suspect ends up getting hospitalized for like severe injuries. Yeah, that's a critical incident. We need to let the public know. However, to your point, there has been decisions by chiefs where they'll release body worn footage on incidents that are sensationalized, that have reached, across all social media platforms to give the public some basic information and, to the buzzword transparency. We do a good job. Should it be all? No, not all.
Now, how often do you see prosecutors charging, say, an officer without the blessing of IA to back it?
Not many. Again, very, very small fraction of the officers. So if I'm an officer and I make an arrest and I testify at the preliminary hearing and I find out that what you wrote in the report and your testimony at this preliminary hearing are completely two different stories, I think I'm making a call to the chief saying, hey, you just perjured yourself. Rare, very rare, but it happens.
But do you think in general across the United States that the prosecutors aren't going after a cop without having, say, internal affairs back it up?
God, that's a good question. That's a very, very good question. I can't speak for, the majority of, district attorneys and prosecutors. It happens. I just can't give it a percentage or a number.
Yeah.
I can tell you just from my experience in 28 years being in law enforcement, it's very minimal. It happens, it definitely happens for sure. But I don't think it always happens. But again, man, that tarnishes everything. That's got to be the worst. As a police officer, if you perjure yourself for an arrest that you made, right, that you're fully responsible for, and you didn't have the reasonable suspicion, you didn't have probable cause, to make this and affect this arrest, and you're just making facts up, you know what? You got to go. You got to go. You don't even belong being a cop. You should try being, I don't know, a cook or, some other profession, but no. And here's the shittiest part about that example. Again, accountability. We'll just walk off and ride off on the sunset. But if we keep preaching accountability, if we keep preaching transparency, you know what? Go and apologize. Go apologize to the district. Go have a press conference in front of the entire community and say, yeah, I own this. And this is what I did. And I apologize for that. But we don't do that.
Now, when you joined IA, do you think you lost friends that were cops?
Good question. I've been asked that before. Marlon is, as you can tell, I'm very energetic. I'm a social butterfly. People like me. Good thing about the Los Angeles Police Department, it's huge, bro. You're talking, I think at one point we almost had 11,000 sworn, 10,200. We almost got to 11,000. Internal Affairs alone has its own building. We had north of 400 investigators.
Wow.
So, no, I didn't lose many friends. I think for me, it was an eye-opener because it was so stressful. And I was in law school. And so I was in my second year of law school and I was getting this moot court, right? Trial advocacy. I was basically acting like a prosecuting attorney, putting on these major cases, right? And don't ask me. And then I was still working overtime. I was a single dad. I don't know how I got through it, but I did. But I didn't lose many friends. I've worked a lot of overtime details with, patrol cops. Oh, you work IA? Problem is that some do. There is that culture. And I'm here to tell you, it's still alive and well. In a big agency, it's not that much of a big deal. In a small to medium-sized agency, oh yeah, you'll lose friends. Can you imagine in an agency of 50? There's only going to be maybe 4 sergeants, maybe 5. Let's just give or take maybe 5. And you just got promoted to sergeant and you have to investigate your ex-partner, who, by the way, you went to the academy with, and you were the best man in his wedding. And now you're working IA. Even your best friend's going to be like, FTG, right? Yeah, they're going to be like, fuck that guy, right? And then the word gets out where everyone's going to be like, no, you're the enemy now. And I want to say is we can do better by having these conversations, by having a podcast, right? I'm going to plug right here, the Marlon Marrache show, right? Where guests have come in and we talk about this process, because I don't know if you've noticed, Ian, if you've listened, I mean, we're both in the podcast world, right? We're hosts, but I haven't seen a police podcast that has in that conversation, a topic of discipline, internal affairs, getting fired, anything that we're talking about, we don't. So I'm blessed to be able to do that. And people thought I was crazy. I have had a lot of haters, naysayers, like, dude, why would you even start an IA podcast? I called it an internal affairs, a police podcast. Can you imagine a cop that got screwed over by IAs looking at a podcast and they see this big old logo in the back? Like, FTG, fuck that guy. Like, who the hell is he, right? And then I became the IA guy, a police podcast. But that was after, hitting, a couple of thousand of subscribers and, hitting the million. I'm like, okay, cool. Now I'm going to brand myself. And it's just one of those things where, just trying to put a little bit of a dent in this law enforcement topic, which, by the way, it's very, very important, and it can get you fired, but we don't do a good job letting these young officers at the academy, recruits, cadets, or even young officers that are on probation, rookie cops, they don't know about this process. As a matter of fact, their first impression of IA is when they get that IA. Like 2 or 3 years later, you're getting an email saying you're being investigated for neglected duty at that traffic stop you had 2 months ago. And you're like, what? Or you hear it through the grapevine. Someone tells you, hey, man, I was here looking for you. Or you get called to the principal's office. Hey, the chief wants to see you. And you're like, did I do something wrong? We're bad. But hey, we preach what? Transparency. So I'm just trying to be transparent, bro.
When did you retire? How many years? And
July will be 4 years. I spent 24 years in the Los Angeles Police Department. I was a sergeant from 2007 up until I retired to 2022. I was a sergeant for 15 years. In those 15 years is where I got involved in the world of discipline and internal affairs. But I also got to go on the record to know that LAPD not only has internal affairs, we also have another section called Officer Representation Section where we defend cops. So for your audience to know, there's police unions that have representatives that will defend cops when they're being alleged with misconduct, while LAPD has a full-blown unit. And I did 2 tours defending cops. So not only had I defended cops, I prosecuted cops. But I'm here to tell you, I'll defend a cop way more than I'll prosecute. Because we don't always get it right. We don't. I understand it's a small fraction, but we don't get it right. When I say we don't get it right, we're all responsible for that. The investigator, the adjudicators, and even your partners, right? We're all in this together. And if we can make this process better, then come on down. Let's have a conversation to try to make it better. And we don't. So from 2008 up until today, I just picked up 2 expert witness cases from an agency down south in California where my job as an expert is to look at this completed investigation from internal affairs and to tell the lawyer, yeah, this thing has got more holes than Swiss cheese. So, put me up on they've been terminated. It's got a dishonesty allegation, right? Because you lied. And here I am testifying in front of this arbitration hearing saying, you know what? They didn't do a good job. Like, I think this investigation is like half baked. And here are the reasons why. And it happens. So, Yeah, man. And teaching, little workshops here, talk about false statements. That's been my bread and butter lately. Because again, like I mentioned earlier, there is a skill set and a certain line of questioning, this Q&A volley, when I'm trying and I'm putting in my very best effort to determine whether or not I should allege, right, write up that allegation in my investigation that you gave me a false statement. And what's the basis of that false statement? It's hard to do. Unfortunately, in our culture, we just arbitrarily want to say that, hey, Ian and Marlon in that traffic stop, they were lying. And that is so unfair.
So how do you feel being on the other end of that, helping or defend people that, they may have lied, but there's holes in the case and you're being hired to, I guess, exonerate them in a way, even though they probably lied, but there's holes in the case?
Right. Good question, because I cherry pick my cases.
Okay.
So when I look at a dishonesty case, I dig deep to ensure. I haven't gotten many phone calls where, hey, I've been charged with a false statement and this is bullshit. The department went after me. Fucking sucks. Fucking I haven't gotten a lot of those. But yeah, no, I get your point. No, because those are the ones that ride off on the sunset and they don't want to know. They don't. If you really feel that the department did you wrong, you don't even need representation. You should just stand up for what actually happened, right? The ones that I'm talking about is where the investigator and or the adjudicator just, nilly-willy just decided without really looking into, here's what happens. And you'll appreciate this. And this is good lessons for everybody who's watching is that when an adjudicator, well, not even normally it's the adjudicator, because you've already turned in your investigation. You have a summary. And in that summary, they grab every interview, the audio, and they'll paraphrase, right? They'll write you'll just cherry pick from the audio and you'll paraphrase a summary of the questions of a 2-hour conversation, right? That you've had with someone. And so what ends up happening is, as an adjudicator, you're reading, well, there's a story being told. But depending on what you paraphrase, that story can guide you to a certain disposition, to a certain outcome. That's not fair. So where we go wrong, we, meaning because we're all in this together, is we don't take the time to listen to all the audio. And by the way, some agencies give you the full transcripts. We don't take the time to read it line by line or listen to the complete audio and compare that to their paraphrase statement and say, one word can change the entire story. And so we're not diligent enough. That's super important. And that's where we need to get better. And so that's my job as an expert witness, is to say, look, I've read all 700 pages. Let me take it to page 28, line 14. Well, line 14 says that he did ask her if he needed medical treatment. And that, there was an injury, that there was a pre-existing injury, right? That she had in her arm, a big gash. But the summary statement mentions nothing about that, besides the fact that the suspect stated, or the arrestee stated, that I got that gash when the officers took me down on the ground. That's way two different stories. And you know what? I would have never have caught that had I not taken the time to listen to the audio or read the entire transcript. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a sample. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that not just in law enforcement, but in any profession, don't be lazy, dude. Do your job and do it good. Be really good at your job. No matter if you're a researcher, doctor, architect, nurse, just be very diligent at what you do. Kind of like hosting. What I will say is a segue of hosting, and I'm sure you get this a lot. Some people call you and say, well, that's not true. Whatever he's saying, that, you didn't ask him this or you didn't ask him that. I love that one. That was my favorite when I get that. Well, you should have asked him about this. Do you know who he really is? And this is what he really did. You know, my thing is, look, I'm not an investigator. I'm not. I'm a host. I get to ask questions and you get to give me the answer. It's not my job to verify whether what you're telling me is true and accurate or not. I suppose there is some vetting.
I think
But what do you think?
it comes down to the guest. I think it reflects poorly on them if they lie.
Yeah.
And also, you vet in the sense of, okay, were you in the LAPD? You sent a photo. You're clearly in the LAPD. There's articles, whatever. Someone that went to prison. All of these guests, they either have a photo of them in prison or something to show they were in prison.
Yeah.
Can you verify that they stabbed someone on the yard at this date? A lot of guests are telling stories from 20 years ago. And number two, a lot of those records are sealed or you're not, it's not possible to, you can verify certain acts, but
Correct.
Then there's people that are always going to have a different narrative of how that scene went down.
Yes.
So if you talk to two people at the same scene, they're each going to have a different perspective.
Correct.
And that's fine. And I think you leave it up to the audience to decide whether they're telling the truth or not.
Very well said. I think I've ran into maybe one or two situations where I've called and they're like, no, that's not what happened. Lucky me, where I have my sources to call that agency. I had one where it was a whole different agency. One of my guests actually worked at that agency. He retired like long time, but I called him and say, hey bro, they used to work at this agency. Let me find out what really happened.
Yeah.
And then what ends up happening is I don't bring you in as a guest because what I don't want is I don't want you misrepresenting, a whole bunch of facts and have people say, oh, well, you're just a host and you just want it for clicks and views.
But those individuals that there are people out there that can verify that what they're saying is false, I don't know what goes through those guests' mind to even come on the show to begin with. Like if you're coming on and saying something completely false that say, especially in the professional world, like in the law enforcement world, where that there's people that could easily prove this, or if you were on a case from the inmate perspective and you're saying, I didn't take a plea deal when they have that paperwork that you did, I just don't get why you would even go on the podcast to begin with. That just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So in my lens, in my world is more like you had this IA, right? That were sustained. These allegations were sustained and you don't want to take some accountability. My first question to all my guests is when they tell me, especially that narrative, well, the department went after the department, fucking IA. That's what I get a lot. I wouldn't say a lot, but the majority of the time, right? My first question to a guest is, what? Is there any accountability on your part? And if the answer is yes, then let's have that talk. I'll invite you to the show. But if you're going to sit here and tell me no, then because people have this misconception. Again, TV shows and movies give the impression that internal affairs is this evil entity, right? So there's this mystification of what this function is. And that, and I'm trying to demystify all that, right? And so I do some digging, some people just don't like taking accountability. I think we talked about that earlier. We don't. Let's just take, I think there was one, he'd be a perfect example, the Grayson. Let's go with that, where he shot the lady, she had a hot boiling water pot of boiling water. He ended up killing herself. If I went right now to his prison and not me, probably you, let's just say he's your guest, right? Is there any accountability on your part? From what I've seen and, his attitude and what depicts on that body-worn video, looks like the kind of guy that probably wouldn't take accountability. I don't know. I'm just assuming here, but I'm just trying to bring up a point where as a host, you sometimes you get these calls or you get people and for me, especially with internal affairs, if we're going to blame and MF the department, right? Let's make sure that it's not very self-serving. And I've been lucky because I haven't had a guest yet with an axe to grind or, to vent. I haven't. my conversations are all about, hey, what can we do better to make this process healthier and give it more awareness? Because apparently we're not doing that good of a job. And when I say we, I always mention we're all in this together. But we essentially, the lens that I'm really narrowing the scope to is probably the chiefs and, and command staff. You want to disassociate yourself with a sensational incident and leave that officer all in the island all by themselves. So that's that's what we're getting to, right? So I invite everybody. I invite chiefs, investigators, accused. I haven't had a guest yet, and I'm getting close, where they have gone through the administrative process. They've gotten fired for a false statement or just something real, real bad, alleged serious allegations of misconduct, to come in and say, yeah, you know what? I screwed up and here are the reasons why. And I'm taking full accountability. I'm getting there. So
What do you think is the most important lesson your career's taught you?
ooh, not be so selfish, for sure. When I, I can make a blanket statement that us men, not all, but us men are very selfish. We think a lot about ourselves before anybody else. And so the biggest lesson for me has been having my awesome daughter and not being selfish. There's so many lessons learned that I have gotten through my 24, it was 25. I did 1 year as a lieutenant over at Cal State University police department. But so many lessons that, you know what, it's not about me. I remember I was on probation. I must have been, 4 or 5 months out of the academy, working out every day. And I used to work from 6 in the morning until 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We were 8-hour shifts. And so all I wanted to do this one day is get off work. That's all I wanted to do. Get off work, go work out, and get ready to go to the club with the boys. My mind was, I got to get off work on time. And so we get this call towards the end of my shift of an elderly Hispanic lady who apparently walked out of her house and took a couple of turns and she's lost. And we get there. She doesn't know her name. We can't identify her. And she's just distraught and nervous to the point where she's getting emotional and crying. And so the whole time I'm thinking, oh my God, dude, I need to get off work, right? Put her in the back seat of the police vehicle. And as I'm looking through the rearview mirror, I see her and she's just crying, bro. I mean, this lady's lost. And she's wearing, a dress, typical dress, where she has this sweater that's kind of tight all the way to her wrist, right? And I just thought to myself, what an asshole I am to think about myself, because all I want to do is get off work. And so we drove her to the nearest convalescent homes. I guess they call them old age homes now. To 2 or 3 of them. We would bring out the manager, say, hey, do you know this lady? No, she doesn't live here. And so as our investigation was continuing, she was hyperventilating and, shortness of breath. We get to the station and she speaks Spanish. I speak Spanish. And I kept reassuring her, so much empathy, and to be there for her, because this lady was lost. We couldn't even identify her. What are we going to do? And so at some point, I kind of touched her, because I'm going to say, ¿sabes qué? No te preocupes. Todo va a estar bien. Aquí estoy contigo. Por favor. Blah, blah, all that stuff, Señora, todo va a estar bien. Vamos a buscar a tu esposo, et cetera, et cetera. And while I'm touching her, I feel like a bracelet. So then I open up and it says, if lost, call this number, right? So of course I go tell my training officer, like I'm all happy and excited, like, dude, I found her number. At the time that we were making that phone call, a priest and her husband comes to the front desk to report her missing. But before they actually arrived at the station, we already called the ambulance because she was having an anxiety attack and she would not let go of me while they're giving her, checking her vitals and doing all that stuff. And so husband and the priest come in, they're like, you know what, she's here. And that reunification, bro, broke me, dude. Made me realize that, you know what, this is exactly where I need to be. And this is exactly what this is all about. But we don't hear stories like this at all. So that was purpose, right? That makes it relevant to the profession because all I kept thinking about is just me. Totally forgot about that. Of course, afterwards, she comes up to me in Spanish, gives me the biggest hug. She's crying. And I'm just like, I don't think I went out that night. I think I ended up working out a little bit, but we didn't do that. So it's those situations that made me realize, and this is just police work in general, where we're here to help you, man. So to all the people who are anti-police, to all the people that have this rhetoric that police are, I think at one point after the Summer of Love and George Floyd, we were labeled, I think I heard it, agents of racial genocide. Wow, that's crazy. Pigs, killers, right? You got to call 911 and guess who's coming to help you? And so unless you've been in my shoes, you will never know what it's like, And again, we respond to crisis and I don't even know you. And you're calling me to help you, So when people start talking about, anti-police and all that rhetoric, politics, look, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're in or on, right? Either or. Public safety is priority number one.
I appreciate you coming on the show today, brother. This was awesome.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it, man. Yeah. Well, you owe me a visit.
Yep.
Thank you so much for having me. And when you come to California, you said you're not that far. I believe where you're going.
Yeah, I'll be staying right in that area.
Right there. Come on into the studio, and we'll get to know your journey.
Sounds good, man.